Psalm 5 opens as a cry for God to hear the voice of the righteous. Yet it unfolds with confidence that access to God is not earned through human performance, but granted through his favor and covenant faithfulness. David approaches God boldly, not because he claims flawless obedience, but because he trusts in the character of the Lord. The psalm reflects the movement from fear to confidence, from accusation to assurance, and from the instability of earthly opposition to the security of dwelling in God's presence. David begins by asking God to consider his meditation and hear his cry. The language is deeply personal. Prayer is not presented as a ritualistic duty, but as communion between a child and his king. Morning by morning, David directs his expectation toward God. This posture reveals dependence rather than self sufficiency. The righteous life begins with trust, not self reliance. When the psalm says that evil cannot dwell with God and that the boastful will not stand in his sight, it highlights the absolute holiness of God. Sin is incompatible with his nature, yet the psalm does not leave humanity hopeless. David says, "By your abundant mercy, I will come into your house." Entrance into God's presence is grounded in mercy, not merit. Even under the old covenant shadows, the way to approach God was always through his gracious provision rather than human achievement. The contrast between the wicked and the righteous runs throughout the psalm. The wicked are described as deceitful, destructive, and empty within. Their words bring death rather than life. This reflects the condition of humanity apart from divine transformation. Sin corrupts both heart and speech. Yet the psalm ultimately points beyond earthly enemies to the deeper problem of rebellion against God himself. The judgment language in the psalm also anticipates a historical reckoning against covenant unfaithfulness. The downfall of the rebellious was not merely an abstract spiritual concept, but became visibly manifested in history when the old covenant order reached its climactic judgment. The destruction that came upon those who rejected God's way vindicated the righteous and confirmed that God governs history faithfully. What had been foretold through the prophets reached fulfillment in the great covenant transition that closed one age and revealed the fullness of the new. Because of this completed work, believers now live in the confidence that they are welcomed into God's presence permanently. The barriers that once separated humanity from God have been removed through the finished work of Christ. The righteous are no longer striving to gain acceptance. They stand in favor already given. The joy described at the end of the psalm becomes the inheritance of all who trust in him. David concludes with celebration. Let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Refuge is one of the dominant themes of the psalm. God himself is the safe dwelling place of his people. The righteous are surrounded with favor like a shield. This favor is not temporary or uncertain. It is covenant security established by God's faithfulness. The believer rests not in personal worthiness, but in the unchanging righteousness provided by God. Psalm 5 therefore moves from prayer to assurance, from conflict to peace. It teaches that God hears his people, judges evil faithfully, and surrounds those who trust him with enduring favor. The psalm ultimately invites believers to live in joyful confidence, knowing that access to God has been secured and that his presence is now their everlasting refuge.